At the beginning of the Cell arc of Dragon Ball Z, we were introduced to King Cold, the father of Frieza, who may have been even more powerful than his son. Together, the two of them came to the Earth, looking for revenge upon Son Goku, after he defeated Frieza and embarrassed him. However, before they were capable of doing that and inflicting incredible damage upon the Earth, another Super Saiyan appeared, with that being Future Trunks, the son of Vegeta from a future timeline that had been ravaged by an even greater threat than Frieza and his father. And with his incredible power, he killed both Frieza and King Cold right then and there, putting an end to King Cold's story in the Dragon Ball franchise. Many years later, Frieza would be revived in the movie Dragon Ball Z Resurrection F, which was also remade in Dragon Ball Super in much worse form. Ugh, just look at that animation. And the idea of bringing back King Cold was flirted with temporarily in a conversation there. However, Frieza decided against it, saying that he didn't want his father bossing him around. However, a question that many fans have had, including myself of course, especially considering how much I talk about King Cold on this channel, is what if King Cold was resurrected instead of Frieza? What would King Cold set out to do after he was brought back from the dead? Would he train like his son? And would he seek revenge upon Trunks, Goku, and all the rest? Well, in this video, I'm going to discuss that. So first, let's begin with the setup for this video, which would involve the resurrection of King Cold himself. Now in this version of the story, let's say that Sorbet and Tagoma, when they went to the Earth and collected the Dragon Balls, instead intended to bring back King Cold, seeing him as a more pragmatic and easier to deal with member of the Frieza clan. And so when it came time for them to wish him back, they used the Dragon Balls to do just that. However, because of the strange contradiction that we saw in the Resurrection F and the Dragon Ball Super version of the story, King Cold may not come back fully intact. So they would have to use at least one wish to bring him back, perhaps in pieces like his son. Considering that Future Trunks didn't exactly leave his corpse to rot and instead blasted that thing with only pieces of his tail and other parts of him left. But considering that Frieza was somehow able to be alive after being chopped up into pieces in the movie, I'm assuming that his father would be able to do the same as well. And so after being placed into the healing chamber, he would come back to full power just as he was before. And I expect that he would be just as angry as his son, especially if he spent the time that he was dead in a very similar kind of hell. At this point, King Cold would have a decision to make. Does he immediately try and get revenge upon Goku and his friends by trying to blow up the Earth, for example? Something that he originally suggested when he and his son approached the planet. Or does he try and bring back order to his empire, which was the very reason that he was brought back to begin with? I suspect that King Cold would go with the latter, especially after Sorbet and Tagoma told him about just how powerful Goku and his friends had become. So I suspect that King Cold would return to his empire at this point and quell all of the rebellions with brute force, bringing all the worlds that had slipped through his fingers back under his control, and re-establishing his empire as it was before. Considering how his strength rivaled his son's, and that the vast majority of the universe stood absolutely no chance whatsoever against even 1% of his full power, I assume that this would be a pretty quick process. Although maybe a couple planets might get blown up here and there along the way. After all, he is a member of Frieza's race, and they love to blow up their planets. However, considering that King Cold seemed to be more intelligent and pragmatic than Frieza, I assume that along the way, he would also be plotting out revenge in his mind, especially because he knows that with the Super Saiyans around, and now with multiple forms on top of that, Goku and his friends pose a clear threat to King Cold's supremacy in the universe. So I suspect around this point that King Cold would probably do the same thing that we saw Frieza do, well, at least off screen, which would be train. And if Frieza could become so powerful over the course of 4 months that he could challenge Super Saiyan Blue Goku after unlocking another form, then I certainly think King Cold could do the same. Now, I've discussed the question of whether or not King Cold can actually transform a number of times over the course on this channel. But as I discussed in this other video here, I think that even though it's a likelihood that King Cold could transform, his final form probably isn't anywhere near as big of a jump in power as Frieza's was. And it's likely that over the course of his lifetime, he probably put in a little more training or a little bit more mastering of those forms than Frieza did, which allowed him to tap into a greater percentage of his power in his lower forms, such as the presumably first or second form that he's in when he touches down on Earth. So I assume that in this situation, it'd be just like father like son, and King Cold would achieve some incredible gains in power power, maybe while also beating up Tagoma, and likely unlock a brand new form of his own. Although in this case it might not be golden like Frieza's, instead might be a different color or even a different shape. Maybe he might even take some inspiration from his non-canon Sun Cooler and give himself some awesome Super Shredder looking form, at which point he'd probably gather up his armies just like Frieza did and come to the Earth looking for revenge, ready to wipe out all the Z fighters and Goku along with them. And I suspect it would play out pretty similarly to how it did in Resurrection F, with the Frieza force arriving and attacking and the Z fighters fighting back and ultimately defeating them. However, when King Cold takes the field and starts the fight, no one would stand any chance against him, except for Goku and Vegeta, who would likely use instant teleportation to reach the planet. This is when the battle would begin between Goku and King Cold, and I suspect what would happen is very similar to what played out in the original fight, with King Cold in his golden form being even more powerful than Super Saiyan Blue Goku, and having the advantage over him, probably still toying with him and trying to torture him and torment him for everything that he did to his family. Now the question arises here is if the fight would play out the exact same way that it did with Frieza, with King Cold having rushed to the Earth before he really mastered his new form, and as a result having his stamina drained down to a certain point to where he no longer could defeat Goku. However, I'm kind of inclined to think it wouldn't play out this way, with that being because of King Cold having a different personality from his son, and like I said before, typically being a little bit more pragmatic. Whereas Frieza was rash and rushed in to try and get his revenge as soon as possible against Goku and Vegeta, thinking that they could never defeat him in his new form, I suspect that King Cold, after tapping into it, would probably do a little bit more training, trying to make sure that his plan was entirely foolproof. And so as a result, I don't think that Goku would be able to as easily wear him down as he did with Frieza, which means that in a one-on-one fight there's a high chance that King Cold would actually come out the winner here, with one-on-one being the key words in this situation. Because I think that just like what happened after Goku got blasted through with the laser, Vegeta would probably step in if Goku's on the verge of being defeated or killed. And as we know in this situation, Vegeta is either just as strong or possibly even stronger than Goku as the Super Saiyan Blue, which means that if King Cold expended a good amount of energy fighting against Goku, there's a chance that Vegeta would have a far greater chance of defeating the evil tyrant. After all, even if King Cold took into consideration the stamina issue, it would become an issue regardless if he had to fight two Super Saiyan Blues back to back. And even if he somehow still maintains the edge, there's a very strong chance that Goku and Vegeta could just team up on him, finally giving a payoff to that thing that we had heard all throughout Dragon Ball Super about how supposedly if the two of them teamed up together they could defeat any foe, possibly even Beerus. Which, given what happened in the Tournament of Power when they fought against Jiren, and considering how Beerus is still possibly ambiguously stronger than everyone else, that statement seems a lot more questionable in retrospect. So there's a chance here that Vegeta would beat King Cold similarly to how he defeated Frieza. Although I do think it'd be pretty cool to see the two Saiyans finally putting aside their differences and putting the hurt on King Cold. Now the question here is if things would play out exactly the same way that they did in Resurrection F after King Cold has been beaten. With that being, would he try to blow up the planet just like Frieza did? Now in this scenario, I'm doubtful that King Cold would have come up with the same contingency plan that Frieza did of using Sorbet to shoot Goku with a laser just in case King Cold was defeated. Mostly because Frieza likely based that plan off of prior knowledge of Goku's personality that King Cold himself never would have possessed, considering that he never encountered Goku in the main story. And even if he did, there's a strong likelihood it never would have even happened, considering the fact that Goku probably wouldn't have beaten him in this scenario. And if Vegeta was the one winning, I doubt that that laser would actually come into play and make any difference. So this means that if King Cold were to try anything, there would be two Super Saiyan Blues there who could prevent this from happening. So even though there is a chance of the Earth being blown up here, I don't think that would necessarily happen in this situation. And if anything, we might just see a repeat of what happened between Trunks and King Cold, where King Cold was beaten and he began to beg for his life and ask for forgiveness, even offering Goku and Vegeta some planets and positions in his empire in return. Of course, I'm sure that Vegeta would want to kill him here, although knowing Goku, he'd probably try and spare him, just like he did with Frieza in the movie. But if he does try some cheap tactics, maybe try and blowing up the Earth from space when he escapes, I suspect that Goku and Vegeta might debut their tag team combination move, the final Kamehameha, a little bit sooner than they did in the main story, and fire that blast right at him and maybe send him flying into the sun just like Cooler as well as Baby in the past. However, things wouldn't end there for King Cold, because because I suspect that come the Tournament of Power, he'd probably once again be taking the role of Frieza. As after Goku gathered his team and discovered that Fat Boo had fallen asleep and wouldn't be able to participate, Goku would probably think about his options and realize that the best choice for him to have on the team would be King Cold, and as a result go down to Hell with Fortune Teller Baba in order to recruit him for a one-day visit. But just like Frieza and Hannibal Lecter, I suspect that King Cold would play a little bit of quid pro quo here and ask for something in return, specifically his resurrection, which of course Goku would be willing to give him. Although in the scenario that King Cold didn't die, I suspect that Goku would probably teleport directly to him, probably while he's sitting at his vineyard drinking his Chateau de King Cold wine. And just like Frieza, I suspect that King Cold probably would have continued to train during all this period of time, just in case he got resurrected again and would be able to fight Goku once more. And if King Cold was actually alive during this situation, he'd probably be even more powerful than Frieza was, because we need to remember that in the main story, Frieza was bound in Hell without the ability to actually move and do real physical training. So the entire time he was there after Goku killed him, he was training through image training, imagining him defeating Goku. And through that, he was able to become just as powerful as Goku as a Super Saiyan Blue, even after Goku trained in the chamber for 3 years, fought Hit, and fought Goku Black as well as merged Zamasu. So if anything, King Cold might actually surpass him, and go into the tournament as perhaps the most powerful member of the team, not counting the Kaioken times 20, or perhaps Android 17 with his broken power-up from fighting poachers. Maybe that's what King Cold should have done all along, just go to 17's island and fight poachers with him. He would have even been able to stomp Jiren at that point. And considering what happened in the original Tournament of Power, I suspect that this would help Universe 7 to ultimately win in the end. Although considering King Cold's personality and his more strategic mind, I suspect that Universe 7 might do even better here, because instead of just screwing around and tormenting different weaker opponents, he'd probably be spending his time trying to find ways to eliminate the stronger fighters in the tournament and eventually help to defeat Jiren. And after their victory, I suspect that King Cold would probably be brought back to life by Whis, just like his son was. And also, brief note, I didn't forget about Frieza in this scenario. I'm just assuming that King Cold wouldn't even want to bother bringing him back, because maybe he'd be tired of taking orders from a snotty kid who ended up getting him killed, especially when he was trying to enjoy his retirement years. This leads into Dragon Ball Super Broly, and I suspect that King Cold probably would have found Broly much like Frieza did, as he was scouting other worlds in a new effort to try and find really powerful Frieza Force members, and probably plans to sell to whoever happens to be buying these things, especially considering there's supposedly only 28 planets with life on them according to Supreme Kai. So I'm guessing a couple of those civilizations are really rich. I wonder what King Cold's tax policy is. Now that's a real question to ask. But ultimately, because of how powerful Goku and Vegeta became over the course of the Tournament of Power, and the fact that they have access to fusion, I think that things would probably play out pretty much the same way as they did in the Broly movie, as well as in the Moro arc, which would come afterward, because Frieza wasn't really even involved in that, and I suspect that King Cold wouldn't be either. He was too busy being written out of the story at the time. As for what would happen after this in the future, that's something that's entirely open. Maybe we'll get a better idea with the coming arcs of the story. But until then, choose your own adventure and have fun. Make sure to subscribe and enable all notifications so you can stay up to date with all of my videos. Thanks for watching, and make sure to stick around, because there's a lot more to come in the future.
Yeah, and you better subscribe.